Hello and welcome to Unit 10. Glad you're here and glad we're able to talk together a little bit. So, we're going to go over the requirements for this unit as well as a presentation on some of the readings from this week. So, let's talk a little bit first about requirements for Unit 10. These items are due on the 30th of March. For reading this week, we've got the Karsh Fox book. This is our first week in this new book on grant writing. So I'm excited for it. I hope it's helpful to you as you're going through it. It's very conversational, and I find it to be a book that's easy to read and easy to digest. And I think it's hopefully going to be something that you can navigate really easily. So if you have any questions about it, feel free to send me an email or stop by office hours. But I think that this is going to be so hopefully something that's really helpful for you. The Powell and Bromley book, we're in chapter 23 for graduate level students. And then the assignments for this week, you have I'll mention two that are kind of special assignments first that aren't typically on your radar. So the first draft of the strategic planning analysis report is due at the end of this unit, unit 10. So this is 3/30/2025 at 11:59 p.m. Your first draft of the strategic planning analysis report is due. And this should be a version of the assignment that is done to the best of your ability. I'm going to be giving you feedback on it so that you can improve it before the end of class and can resubmit it to be able to get a final grade on this. But this will give you some feedback and some ideas on how to keep improving the assignment. But it is due here on the 30th. Please reach out if you have questions. This is something that is going to involve your whole team, and it's a fairly big assignment. So, and you may even find some things that are hopefully helpful in this lecture that will help you as you're creating the first draft of this assignment. The other kind of extra thing that's different here is group project memo 2 is due. Actually, it looks like this is a little bit of a typo. So this is not due this week. I want to make that really clear. I see that it's actually due here on the other week. So it's on the following week, week 11. And that's much better. I think I had changed that because I didn't want you doing two of those things at once. So just to be really clear, the first draft of the strategic planning analysis report is due at the end of Unit 10, but your memo 2 is not going to be due until the following week. Please reach out if you have any questions on that, and I'll make sure that that's updated on Canva as well. All right, in addition to that, you have the instructor lecture video, which you're watching now, the group presentation for this week, discussion board posts, reading quiz, and then group 3 is doing a presentation on Unit 11, which you'll get to meet here by the end of Unit 10. Awesome. Let's go ahead and talk a little bit about this set of chapters we were reading from the new book. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen with you. And then we're going to make it large, all that fun stuff. So here we go. There's the screen. We're going to share this so that it's a little easier to look at. Here we go. All right. So grant writing, part 1. And we've got a couple of parts we're going to be covering here, but this is a chance to acclimate yourself to what grant writing is, to kind of get into the headspace of it, to understand some of the basic principles and ideas behind it, and why it's so important for an organization to be able to do grant writing and to have that be a part of hopefully what's a lot of different kind of funding sources. But grant writing is an important piece of that. In the organization that I'm in now, grant writing is part of our annual budget and funding model. It's managed often by our chief operating officer in conjunction with our dean, so the leader of our organization. They work together to do a lot of our grant writing, and they also have some support from our larger university, which is helpful. But you'll find for us, grant writing makes up a significant part of our overall budget, especially on large projects that are really visionary and pushing the envelope. Oftentimes, we have grant funding for those projects. I've been involved in a lot of different grant projects, in writing them and in helping kind of direct funds and figure them out, whether it's taking the lead on the grant or being a supporting piece in the grant writing process. I've been a part of grants that have been awarded. There was $1 million grant process I was part of at one point that went through and was successful, and that was helpful for the organization. There are a lot of others that I've been a part of that haven't worked and haven't been funded, and that's just part of the grant writing game. Is not, I'll say this here at the very front, is when you're doing grant writing, it's really helpful to have a mentality where it's kind of like part of your cycle. It's part of your process. You have a certain number of grants that you plan to apply for each year. It's just baked into the process, and you're not pinning all of your hopes on getting one grant. It can't be treated just um, like either we're going to get this grant or it's not going to work, right? You have to be creative and flexible and be willing to commit to a process of grant writing that is cyclical in a lot of ways, because some years you'll get the funding you're looking for and other years you might not, or you might get something you didn't plan to get, right? Then opportunity came up and you need to pursue it. So just something to kind of keep in mind, not to pin all of your hopes on one grant that you're hoping to get, or else you can't do your mission work, right? But rather to see the practice of grant writing as one that is cyclical and that just has to be kind of engaged in on a regular basis. So, things to know here right at the beginning. This was from round table one in the book, and I found it actually to be really helpful. It's a great kind of conversation with industry professionals as you're getting to know what goes into grant writing. So, things like these kinds of things came out of the roundtable discussion, and I thought they were helpful. Um, so I think this was written 2018, 2019. So it's a few years old now, but it's actually really applicable to right now. And the climate that they described in terms of funding climate is actually really similar to what is going on right now. Um, Although I would argue that it's probably even worse right now. So they were talking about the funding climate being challenging because of the economy, because of a number of factors. They mentioned several points in the readings today that government funding is also difficult. Federal government funding, state funding, all of those things can be really challenging. They were finding those resources to be less available than they were in the past, and that's even more true today. So some things to be aware of. And in light of that, when you look at that climate, a challenging funding climate, program outcomes and impacts are more important than ever. That's the first bullet point here. It's more important than ever to be able to demonstrate that your programs are achieving the benchmarks that you've set for them, right? Data-driven analysis to be able to show, yes, we are accomplishing these things that we've set out to do, and here's the numbers to prove it. And also being able to demonstrate how, even beyond the numbers, but how is your impact making a difference at a narrative level? What is it that it's doing in the community, in the lives of real people? We talked a little bit about this earlier in the class when you're talking about the kind of work that your organization is doing. And in this climate, it's even more important than ever to be able to demonstrate program outcomes. Because grant makers expect a return on their investment. More and more grant makers are approaching grant making with an investment mentality, one that's almost like a hedge fund. They want to invest in things that they care about and they want to see a return on that investment. And they want to put their money towards whichever avenue is going to give them the best return on their investment. So it's something to keep in mind that grant makers are going to expect a return. It's not just enough to be able to say, oh, we're doing good work. You need to show how you're doing it, and it needs to meet certain benchmarks. You must diversify funding sources. Otherwise, you're going to be able to be moved around just by whatever forces in the market are there or whatever kinds of insecurities might pop up. And it's really, really important to diversify funding. We've talked about that throughout this class, but that is something specifically around grant writing that's important, excuse me. Being creative and flexible and willing to take risks when you are grant writing, you're going to find that there are opportunities to where you will need to be flexible to be able to meet the requirements or the desires of grant makers. And sometimes you may have to take a risk to be able to do that. That is okay, and that's important. Learn to be an advocate for your organization. For me, sometimes I get nervous or embarrassed to talk about myself or the work that I'm doing too loudly, right? It's a lot from my upbringing. And in this case, you need to kind of put some of those reservations at the door and be a cheerleader for your organization and be able to say, yes, we're doing great stuff, and here's what it is. And how do you advocate in a way that the donor base you want to connect with, or specifically the grant makers you want to affect to connect with, that they'll be able to hear it, right? So motivate your board. This is really important. More and more, it is really important who is on your board in terms of funding, the kinds of connections that they have, the kinds of doors that they can help you open, and the ways that they can also advocate for the organization. So choosing that board is always important, but more than ever, it's important to make sure that they're engaged and working alongside you even in this, in everything the organization does, but in this grant writing and fundraising effort, especially. Recruiting and thanking volunteers is really important. It shows a grassroots support for what your organization is doing, that people care enough to be engaged and give their time to the organization. And then finally, this is one that as a marketer and communicator, I really appreciated is a downturn or a tough time economically in the kind of fundraising world is a great time to focus on your image as an organization. And this involves a whole bunch of things. We could do like if I was sitting down with your organization, we were consulting about how to improve the image of your company. We would piece by piece take apart everything that's public facing for your organization, things like your website and all the individual assets that are part of your website, things like the organization's about page, bios of your leadership, right? The photos that your leadership has on the website. All of these things tell a story, and they should be curated in such a way that improves your image, that connects, that leverages your image to advance the mission of the organization. That's probably the best way to think about it. You don't want things that distract from your mission when it comes to your image. But also, you can see these things as leverage. They're ways to increase the trust and um, the way that people see you, the reputation that you have in other people's eyes in terms of the work you do. And so this is not just cosmetic. This is also, it's about following through on your organization's promises, on being connected well, on building relationships and stewarding those well. It's not just an image thing in terms of, it's not just um, it's not just a construct or a surface level thing in terms of your image. It has to do with trustworthiness too. But I think sometimes nonprofit organization leaders either lean towards one or the other. They lean towards the trustworthy end of things, and they don't care at all about their website. And you go on it, and it's just terrible, right? Fonts from the 80s, and you can barely navigate your way around. Or they lean way towards the other end, and they've highly curated an image that doesn't match reality in terms of follow through and what they deliver on. And that's also problematic. And so cultivating and maintaining a good image for an organization involves both surface level and depth. Yeah. Okay, so prerequisites and definitions. As we look here at grant writing, and this is helpful. Even excellent proposals don't guarantee that you're going to receive funding, right? I've written some proposals that I thought were pretty good, pat myself on the back, and they did not get funding. And it was disappointing and it was frustrating at times. But you have to kind of go into this process with a little bit of thick skin, understanding that there could be a lot of organizations competing for these dollars. I think the book talks about one organization that awarded 1,400 grants in a cycle, and there were over 40,000 people that or organizations that applied for these in the process. That's a lot, and it's a lot of competition. It doesn't mean that because you didn't get the award that you didn't write a good proposal. It could just simply be that that wasn't what the organization was looking for at the time. So go into a grant writing process hopeful, expecting to get the grant, but also don't be surprised if you don't end up getting it for whatever reason. You could keep growing, keep refining what you're doing. That's why I mentioned a little bit at the beginning that you kind of need to view this cyclically as something that you do that you get up and do again over and over again, kind of baking it into your routines and into your rhythms. So, first, asking this question, who and what is your organization? Are you a nonprofit? What kind of what sector are you in? Are you a religious-based nonprofit? Are you a government entity? Are you an organization that's like a small local nonprofit? There's a lot of these questions that matter when you're looking at funding and the kinds of projects that funders want to be a part of, right? So I'm thinking of like um, multiple organizations that I've been a part of have been religious organizations that are religiously affiliated, either as a like a religious community or like a house of worship, or as a now I'm at a Jesuit Catholic university, right? So it's higher education and it's also religiously based. And one of the big things there, like one of the big players in that space in terms of funding, is the Lilly Foundation. And the Lilly Foundation does a massive number of grants. They have fingerprints kind of everywhere, but they are very interested in religious organizations and in higher education. And so there are multiple grants from the Lilly Foundation that fund projects that we're a part of, and that's important. And you get to know kind of the big players in the field that you're interested in for grant writing, right? But like, so the Lilly Foundation is important for us, but maybe like I don't know, I'm thinking of like a community park foundation wouldn't really have a way of applying for a Lilly Foundation grant. If they did, they probably wouldn't get noticed, right? Because that's not what the Lilly Foundation is looking for. So, who and what is your organization? Knowing that and then being able to connect it to funders is really important. Going into this process, knowing that grant requirements are often very detailed and complex, there can just be a bunch of things you have to do in terms of formatting, in terms of documentation, and the things that are required for this. It's a big project, and go into it expecting that it's going to be a lot of work. Um, when you're looking at what grants should be used for, right? What can I get a grant for? Can I get a grant for myself to buy a car? No, those are silly things, right? And the book kind of talks about some of that. But I think in this class by now, you're probably starting to understand that grants are meant to empower an organization and what they do. But kind of taking that a step further, and this is something I found helpful in the book, is that grants are best used to supplement and fund a well-designed program that addresses a specific need. So grants are at their most powerful when they can be connected with something that is well-defined, that is got a clear connection to your organization's mission and to what you're doing, and it's a program that's gonna be great, right? You can tell as you're writing this, hey, um, I've been a part of projects where it's like, oh wow, this is going to be a signature event. It's going to get a lot of attention. It's going to make some big waves, or it's going to be really helpful and important. And I think some funders would want to be a part of that. They'd want their name attached to that, and they'll be able to tell as they look at the program details that this is hitting the spot that it needs to, that it's well designed, that it meets a need, and that it's going to get some good attention, right? Those are always pluses for grant writing organizations. And having a specific need that that program addresses also helps because it shows that, hey, this is going to be able to be used effectively. These dollars are going to be able to be used effectively. And with that, all fundraising should flow from and support your mission. It should go back to that. It should be very clear as people who are in funders and making these decisions should be able to read your proposal and be able to connect it back to what you do and why you do it, and it not be a surprise, right? Other things to think of here, there's different kinds of foundations. So they list family foundations, independent private foundations, federated funds, corporate foundations, community foundations, financial institutions. These are all types of foundations. And it's actually really helpful to know a little bit more about that. So I'd go back and read this chapter if I were you. Make sure, unless if you hadn't already kind of circled some things and highlighted, this is really helpful to understand the different kinds of foundations and what they might be looking for. I think one of the more interesting ones to me is the Community Foundation, which is stitched together of a lot of different funds from community members. So in community foundations, you'll often find these named funds that are from specific donors that want to address something specific. So when I worked at the Forbes Funds, which is kind of a subsidiary of the Pittsburgh Foundation. It had there are several different um, funds within the foundation, within the Pittsburgh Foundation, but also within the Forbes funds that fund particular activities and particular programs based on the interests of the donor, right? And that can be really interesting when you're looking at it because you may find that, whoa, wow, when I look at the Pittsburgh Foundation, it's intimidating to see these different grants for huge like arts organizations and they're giving away $500,000 here and $1 million here and wow, we're just we're a small local community food bank or artist residency or something and we I don't know that we know what to do with $1 million, right? Well, you can go and see sometimes they'll have these funds that do smaller gifts that are more kind of specified. Maybe it's something that would bring an artist in for 6 months and provide a $30,000 stipend for them, right? There's some of those projects that might have kind of some possibility in a community foundation that they wouldn't have somewhere else. And the other really nice thing about community foundations is that they're often very embedded in the local context, right? So if you're in Pittsburgh and you're doing nonprofit work, you're eligible to apply for a Pittsburgh Foundation grant that you might not be eligible to apply for if you lived, say, in, Ohio or in Oregon, right? So, how do you find grants? This is a good question and will be helpful for you as you're applying for a grant because you have to identify one as part of your final projects. You're identifying a grant that you will be applying for. There are these two uh, websites, these organizations called the Foundation Center and the Grantsmanship Organization, and both allow you to search for grants. There's different levels of paid and unpaid kind of services they offer, but those are helpful resources to be able to see grants. There's some other online resources as well that can be helpful in that process. And if you have questions about that, reach out and I can point you in the right direction. What grant makers want? So this is a big question, right? And as you're doing this, as you're filling out your application, you're creating your materials and your proposal, it's really important to keep in mind that every fraction of a point counts in this process, right? So you might literally, if we go back to that example of 40,000 applications and only 1,400 plus grants were awarded, and that kind of calculation, these grant officers are going through these applications and they're ranking these organizations and they're assigning points in a lot of cases, saying, "Oh, this works well for us. Here we go. Here's a half point here. Here's a quarter point here." You know, at the end of the day, if you have a quarter of a point more than the other organization that's at the end of the list, you're making it, and they're not. And so, paying attention to detail really counts in grant writing. So first, you need to read the application carefully. This is important. There might be some things that surprise you. I'd even take notes as you're writing, maybe highlight things. There are common application forms out there sometimes that are used between organizations, and I appreciate it when this happens because otherwise you're always dealing with these non-standard kinds of forms. Appendix 4 in the textbook gives an example of one of those forms that can be standardized across multiple organizations, and you have to see if they accept it, and there's lots of different things there, but it can be helpful when that's the case. You need to, when you're beginning to write the grant, first determine your eligibility. Is this something you can apply for? If it's just for organizations in Pennsylvania, are you located in Pennsylvania? There's simple things like that, but often they'll have eligibility requirements around the kinds of populations that are served, right? Are these grants intended for organizations serving lower income populations? Are they meant to help an organization that's in the arts? Like there's a lot of these questions of eligibility that you need to pay attention to before you start writing one, so you don't waste your time. That's important because you can sink a lot of time into this and realize, oh, we're not actually eligible. But also, it's really embarrassing if you submit an application that you're not actually eligible for, and it wastes the organization's time too. So then, once you've determined that, see, does your idea fit with the request for proposals or the request for applications, the RFP or RFA? This is something that an organization usually has on their website for a grant. They'll have like a request for proposals that will go out that will explain what it is they're looking for. It will give eligibility requirements, but also gives kind of a conceptual framework for this is what we want to fund, right? Look at the past projects that a funder has supported. I was doing this the other day. There was a academic kind of grant that I was looking at. And I went back to the organization, and they're attached to Villanova University. And I was looking at the different requirements that they have for the grant, but also I was looking at past projects that they had funded in the past. And I was looking through it, and it was really helpful. I was looking at last year and saying, oh, well, here's some projects that don't fit me. There's a lot of social science stuff, and I don't do social science. And then I was looking through and I saw two of my friends who had received the grant last year. And I was like, oh, wow, they received the grant. And as I looked at that, I was like, oh, okay. They do work that is in the same neighborhood as the work that I do. So maybe I should apply for this, right? I can give you a good idea of what they might be looking for. You must provide all materials and items requested. Remember, this is an elimination process, and if you're missing something, um, this is helpful. So, um, I think started grant writing and thinking that people were going to always be on my side in terms of helping me get answers if I needed them. If I forgot something, they might reach out in a really friendly way and say, "Hey, Preston, you forgot this application." The grant writing world is not this way. It is brutal is not the right word, but it is a little cutthroat. There is this sense of like, well, if you forgot to include your nonprofit status proof, or if you didn't have another piece of the materials for the application, the chances are they're not going to reach out and ask you for it. More than likely, they're just going to toss out your application, and you'll hear back in 6 months that you didn't get the grant, and you're not going to know why. And it was because you missed something important. That's way more common than getting an explanation for why you didn't get it. So, because of that, it's really important to make sure that you have all the materials that were requested, all the items, and that you're checking that off your checklist and you're doing your due diligence, because somebody else on the other end isn't going to do that for you in most cases. Sometimes I've been pleasantly surprised, but usually that's the case. Um, Background information. So know the language of the organization that you're applying to. If they have certain terms that they're using in their work, try to incorporate that in the grant writing process, right? And then formatting is important. They're going to be looking again for any reasons to disqualify you. Getting ready to write and some intangibles. So as you're getting ready to write, it's really important to gather all the materials that you need. And the list is long. There's a list in one of the chapters we were reading of all the things you might need beforehand. And it's extensive, right? And you can save yourself by making sure you have all of those in some folders in some easily accessible places beforehand. Digital copies of those could be really important, and that can help save you in the long run. So intangibles, these are some things that nobody really tells you until you get into the grant writing process, but they can help. And I really appreciated them in the book, and I found a lot of these to be true in my own experience. So things like, excuse me, you might be wondering who writes this proposal. Well, anyone can write it in an organization. It can be the executive director. Excuse me, I've often found the executive level positions are really heavily involved in these grant writing processes. At all the organizations I've been involved in, usually it is an executive level, like either the executive director or the CEO or someone who's helping steward these. They might not be doing all the writing, but they're often the person who's leading the process. It's not always the case, though. It could be a volunteer, it could be a consultant, it could be a director, a program like director for a particular initiative, right? I'd say what really drives this is like how big is the grant and how important is it to the organization, and where does it kind of belong? Where does it fit under the organization's mission? And that might tell you who would be a good fit for leading the process, along with the skills that that person possesses. Beware of politics as you're doing this, the internal politics of running a grant. People, even internally, can get funny about money, and it can be awkward. And so making sure that there's representation where there should be representation, that the people who need a voice in the process and have a seat at the table have that is important. Making sure you're cultivating goodwill internally throughout this process. You don't want a grant to win a grant, but have your organization torn apart in the process, right? when you're getting ready to do this, a kickoff meeting could be a great idea to get everybody on the same page who has to contribute pieces to a grant. Because often it's not just one person working in isolation. There's a lot that goes into this and a lot of people contributing. Make sure to do your homework on the grant maker and the field. Know who they are and what they're looking for, right? We've talked a little bit about that already. Some other things. Be honest. Don't oversell your organization. If you can't deliver on what you're promising, it's going to look bad for you, not just with this organization, but just in general. So be really honest. You want to put your best foot forward. You want to show the best side of your organization, but don't stretch the truth, right? Give something that's real, and that's going to set you up for good things too. If you get the grant, right? Don't be greedy. So this is important too. Like, don't push it too much. You should be asking for fair and realistic coverage of costs, but you should be honest about things with them and then with yourself, really, as you're looking at this. Um, if you're pitching something and you say, "Hey, we need $1 million for this project," the people who are doing the underwriting for these grants, they are smart. They're often experts in the field. They've often been program managers before at other organizations and kind of worked their way to they are where they are. And they're going to know if you really need $1 million for this grant or if it's something that can be done for half that. And if it can be done for half that, they're going to want to expand their impact. Remember their return on investment. And they're probably going to go with another organization that can give them that. So don't be greedy. But be fair and realistic about your costs. Don't shortchange the investment that your organization is making into this. Include the in-kind contributions that your organization is putting up front to make this happen, right? So when you're listing the costs of the project, list everything, right? It's included in the costs for a project is what it takes to keep the lights on, program support that's coming from positions you've already funded as an organization, right? Maybe there are supplies or other investments that you've made, equipment that you'll be contributing towards this project. Count those dollars because that's something your organization is investing in the project that you're asking funding for. Show that there's a diversification of funding. It can often be really helpful to show, hey, we already have buy-in from these funders to make this project a reality. There's someone on our board who gave a check for $10,000. The Lilly Foundation has already contributed half the costs for this. What we need from you is 40% of this to make it happen. Here we go, right? Um, Enhance the organization's reputation. Talk about what you do in the actual document. You're pitching yourself. You're telling a story. So continue to make your organization look good in an honest way, right? And consider the reader, right? Think of things like table of contents and providing page numbers at the bottom, as long as that fits within the formatting they've requested. Make it easy for them to see things, bolding, headings, things that make the reading experience easy and so that they don't feel frustrated as they're going through it. The last thing you want is for a funder to feel frustrated as they're reading your application because they can't find something, right? Watch your language. Make sure it lines up with the field and what the funder might expect. Build relationships with funders before applying. If the first time they've ever heard of you is when they see your application come across their desk, that's not a great thing. They should be seeing your newsletter. They should be seeing you in the newspaper, and they should be seeing the work you're doing online or represented at conferences that they might be attending. You shouldn't be a stranger to these funders that you're applying for. Sometimes you just have to start somewhere and they don't know you yet, and that's okay. But as much as you can, cultivate relationships with funders before applying. Keep up with the news. Make sure that what you're doing is current and that it doesn't look out of step with what's happening in the world. From a personal level, don't dawdle, right? For me, I procrastinate and I know I procrastinate. So I have to build in these deadlines and these expectations to get things on time, and not just in like right at the last minute. But get them in with a week to spare, right? Be responsible, get in early. It makes an impression, and it also helps avoid some mistakes because things aren't right up to the wire. Be organized, have a good system for what you do so you're not unnecessarily duplicating work. Be technologically savvy, have a good technology media presence, and then focus on the big picture. How does this grant fit into what you're already doing? Is it something that's really, really important and you need to, stay up till 2 a.m. over the next week to get it done? Or is it something that, if we get it, great. If not, yeah. Understand where the grant fits in the big picture. Hey, thank you for your time. Thanks for having the conversation with me. I'm excited to see your projects as you get ready to do this mock grant writing exercise as part of your final project. Reach out to me if you have questions. Grant writing is a difficult process. It's hard, has a lot of work involved in it, but it can be amazing in the sense that it can give new life to and kind of rocket fuel to something that an organization is already doing that's making a difference in its community. When you add in funder dollars and support and backing to that, it can really come to life. And I think when you have those skills to be able to write a really powerful and compelling grant, you're able to really contribute something meaningful to an organization and to the work that it's doing in the world. So this is important, and I appreciate your time. Take care.